Looking back on my library of old games, and even my newer ones for that matter, I'm starting to come to a bit of a realization. I like anime, and quite frankly, I've always liked anime, and despite what some people might tell you, that in itself is not a crime, and there's nothing really wrong with it. It just kind of depends on how far you're willing to go with it. Even then, despite the fact that I clearly enjoy these Japanese products and will even sit down and watch them every so often, nowadays I usually only do so if it comes highly recommended from someone I trust or if I see it in enough places online and I get curious. So congratulations to your viral marketing, your scheme is working. And when I think back on it, I've kind of always been that way. I didn't seek out obscure shows or even buy manga at Barnes & Noble, I just watched whatever came on public broadcasting at the time. That's not to say I didn't religiously watch these shows. I mean, holy crap, I remember my most anticipated part of my day as a kid was coming home off the bus so I could sit down and watch Gundam Wing, Sailor Moon, and Dragon Ball Z. I loved watching these shows, but when I think back to it, there was one show that I went the extra mile to watch, one that I remember enjoying a whole lot, and one that I woke up at 6 a.m. on every single weekday just so I could see it, even during the summer. And that show was called Zoids Chaotic Century. So in case you haven't figured it out yet, this episode isn't going to be about a video game, it's going to be about a show, specifically a show about robot animal mecha. Does that mean I'm going to stop talking about video games? No. Does it mean I might start talking more about television shows I used to watch and other stuff? Maybe. Just depends on what I feel like. Also, as a heads up, here's your obligatory spoiler warning. Gonna be talking about spoilers, so you heard it here first. This is Zoids Chaotic Century. So before I get into this review, let's have a little history lesson. In 1982, the Japanese toy company Tomy introduced a new line of toys under the name of Mecha Bonica, but after the line wasn't very successful in Japan, they decided to drop the project. That changed when they introduced these toys to the West though, where, like so many other things that came over, had its name changed. These were the Zoids. If it weren't for the fact that Power Rangers hadn't come out over here yet, I'd think that whoever named this was some guy from Jersey or Brooklyn who wanted to bank off the Power Rangers' popularity. Come on, you douchebags, we gotta form the Megazoid to fight Vegeta. The Zoids toys actually entertained some success on Western shores, so Tomy decided to reintroduce the toy line on their home turf under the new Zoids name. So in other words, a foreign market saved the domestic product. Go figure. Years passed and Zoids eventually got spin-off content in ways that you'd expect, the toys now popping up in manga, video games, and of course anime. In the early 2000s, at the height of the anime boom in the United States, Zoids was eventually brought to Western television programming and appeared on Cartoon Network's action block Toonami, also known as every nerd kid's after-school cartoons. I remember really liking the show and thinking that it was good. It was a battle tournament kind of show where the protagonist would fight in competitive robot matches every week and fight wacky and entertaining villains while occasionally throwing in a more serious opponent that would actually make the good guys sweat. It was still a fairly lighthearted show though, with lots of jokes, silly moments, and overall very low stakes. I like Zoids and watch it every day, but that didn't change the fact that I wasn't really wowed by it. It was good, but not amazing. Still, if it was on TV, I'd watch it, which is how I stumbled upon something interesting one morning. One fateful morning at around 6:30 a.m., I was awake for some reason or another. And I don't know about you, but when I was 12, I didn't go back to bed when I woke up. Once my feet hit the floor, the day was on. It's kind of a far cry from how I am now. Anyway, I ventured into the kitchen that morning and flipped on the tube and poured out a bowl of cereal like I normally did. While looking at the TV guide, I saw that Zoids was on. Well, hey, nothing better on, might as well watch Zoids, my 12-year-old brain thought. I turned over to Cartoon Network, expecting the cast of blonde idiot Ace, sulky bass player, and angry punchy girl to grace my screen, but instead got something almost completely different. Hold on, what? That's not the theme song. That's not, who's this guy? What's that thing? What's going on? Who's this girl? Who's that girl? Is that a pirate? Why is there a pirate? Oh my god, is that a robot dinosaur? Where did that come from? Can I have one? Does it come in red? So here's a fun bit of trivia that 12-year-old me didn't know. It turns out that the Zoids show that I had been watching on Toonami wasn't the first one made. It was actually the second. But for some strange reason, Viz Media, the company behind its translation, decided to dub the second show first when it was brought overseas. Why did they do this? Not really sure, but if I had to guess, it probably had something to do with when the show came out and what genres were popular at the time. The most popular anime on television in the West at this point was merchandise-driven battle shows, not merchandise-driven war shows. Shows like Yu-Gi-Oh!, Beyblade, and of course the 800-pound gorilla that defined one generation and bewildered the previous, Pokemon. Zoids New Century, as it became known as, would just fit the mold of what was popular at the time. It was light-hearted, it featured cool robots you could buy as collectibles, and it dealt with characters battling to be the best like no one ever was. The trend of a more serious genres of war is hell but giant robots are cool was starting to be overtaken. When bringing Zoids over, it was probably just decided that the second show would be more popular, so that's what they went with. But holy crap, that was not the case when it came to me, man. I cannot tell you exactly what it was about this show, but there was a period of time in my 12-year-old life where I was obsessed with it. I would go to bed at 8:30 every night so that I would wake up at 6 a.m. just so I could watch it and immediately be ready to be taken to school. I drew really crappy drawings of the Blade Liger during class and actually became friends with one of my bullies because he liked watching the show too. I cried crocodile tears whenever I accidentally overslept and missed an episode, at which point my dad would come in and stare at me with disappointment in his eyes as he realized his son was a loser. But why? Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Not why my dad thought I was a loser, but why I love this show so much. I decided I needed to sit down and rewatch the entire series to see if I could figure that out. Zoids Chaotic Century takes place on the fictional world of Planet Z, a world much like our own, aside from the fact that it's rampant with giant robot animal mecha that people use to kill each other on a daily basis, and that every single person is wearing war paint like they just came from a carnival. This is never explained. It's just the norm here, and nobody ever talks about it. Ever. The show mostly follows the adventures of a young boy named Van Flyheight, a cocky little son of a bitch that wants to be a great Zoid pilot just like his dad was before he was killed. Van ends up stumbling upon a cool robot dinosaur which he names Zeke, who brings a dead Zoid back to life for him, which is called a shield liger.
What's a liger?
It's pretty much my favorite animal. It's like a lion and a tiger mixed. Bred for its skills and magic.
Later, Van finds a naked girl in a capsule named Fiona who also has amnesia. After foiling a bandit attack on his hometown, Van decides to help Fiona get her memory back. The two stumble upon some ruins soon after where Fiona sees some ancient writing and remembers two important yet very mysterious words.
The writing says Zoid Eve.
What is this Zoid Eve?
With that as their objective, the two embark on an adventure across the planet together to find out how to get Fiona's memories back and to find out just what is Zoid Eve. So in other words, Zoids Chaotic Century uses every single cliched anime trope in the book, and then some. Seriously, over the course of the show, we've got hot-headed kid protagonist who wants to be the best, mysterious amnesiac girl, non-human sidekick, kooky old man that's actually someone important, and many more. The main crux of the show follows Van and Fiona's adventure through the desert wastelands of Z, where they're searching for some mysterious thing called the Zoid Eve. Along the way, they even get more characters to join their motley crew, like the cool yet quirky older sister character, Moonbay, and the jackass with a heart of gold, Irvine. Despite there being a loose, overarching plot, Zoids Chaotic Century mostly followed the new adventure every week story structure. Van and the others wander from place to place trying to dig up information on Fiona's past, but very rarely actually finding anything. Instead, always getting roped into helping some local village from a threat, fighting bandits, or saving orphans, or whatever else. Then about halfway through the first season, the plot shifts and suddenly becomes more political. The group ends up getting caught up in the growing conflict from the two major political powers on the continent, the Gylos Empire and the Helic Republic. Here's the interesting thing about this plotline though. Despite using other cliched tropes, Chaotic Century actually handles this one in kind of an interesting way. You see, when it comes to writing fiction, the easiest way to paint one of your faction as the bad guys is just to add the word empire to it. Galactic Empire, Galra Empire, the Klingon Empire. Seriously, it's everywhere. And when you think about it, it does make sense. The idea of a single nation ruling over a large portion of the world just invites the writing of a tyrannical dictator vying for power, and even has some grounding in our actual history. And yet, despite being so generic in so many other areas, Zoids Chaotic Century doesn't go that route. The main villain of the first season is a Sephiroth-looking asshole named Gunter Prosen, a minister in the Gailos Empire who, you guessed it, wants to rule the world. The only thing standing in his way, though, are those meddling Republicans and their robot dinosaur. Except not really. See, Prosen is a bad guy, but he is also played up as a minority. Prosen's got his own little treacherous faction of bad guys, like prototype Sasuke Uchiha and an evil woman with a bad pink haircut. I mean, Jiminy Christmas lady, just go to Great Clips, it's only like $13. But despite Prosen being a giant dirtbag, the Empire as a whole isn't painted as villainous. In fact, Van actually meets the Helic Republic first and is not given a warm reception, the episode ending in a fight. The Republic is kind of painted like assholes with this first interaction, and while they do get better later on, it goes to show that while they're not exactly knights in shining armor here, they're soldiers. They're fighting a war to protect their families and country, and don't care too much about honor and all that jazz. Whether or not they're right is just a matter of perspective. There's several moments in this series where people from both countries are portrayed as heroes and villains. It captures a nice gray area, which is something that I feel wasn't always handled well in shows like these. I mean, when it really comes down to it, you gotta remember that Zoids is a show made to sell toys. That was its main purpose. The anime and its story are just a vessel to get kids to grab their parents by the wrist and to drag them off to Toys R Us to buy them a blade liker. But the fact that this show also went through the trouble of creating a decent story and developing its characters is actually pretty cool. There's also the subject of the characters themselves. Despite falling into a bunch of typical anime tropes, the characters of Zoids are actually not terribly written. Probably one of the best examples at work here is the main character, Van. Van starts the show as your typical 90s anime kid protagonist. He's hot-headed, loud, and quite frankly, a little annoying at times. Throughout the show, Van actually gets a great deal of character development and really grows as a person, both in his personality and his fighting skills. I kind of felt like Van was a fairly realistic example of someone that's striving to be better at something, because he really sucks the Zoid pilot at the beginning of the show. For the most part, Van is always being helped out by somebody when facing down the bad guys. If it's not one of his friends fighting alongside him, it's his organoid Zeke powering up his Liger to make it usable. Outside of that though, Van gets his ass handed to him on multiple occasions, especially whenever he goes up against his evil counterpart and rival on the show, Raven. The thing is though, is that even though he only wins by the skin of his teeth most of the time at the beginning, Van eventually starts to get a lot better as a pilot as he learns from his battles. There's a really cool episode towards the end of the first season where Raven and Van have a showdown and Van loses the help of Fiona and Zeke towards the end of the fight. Yet despite not having them with him, he's able to turn things around and give Raven a run for his money all on his own, something that he's never been able to do until now. Furthermore, Van also gets to grow as a person. He starts to realize that the world isn't all black and white and that people are a lot more complex than just being good and evil. Best example of this is in one episode where Van stops a lynch mob from beating up some Imperial soldier while they're staying in the Republic's capital. But then later, the same soldier that Van saved steals a Republican Zoid and goes on a rampage at the capital, probably killing a lot of innocent people. Van ends up letting the guy go at the end because he sees that he has loved ones to take care of just like any normal human being, and also because Van can't bring himself to kill the guy. They really drive in that whole war is hell message at this show.
Now, Van, you shouldn't blame yourself. It doesn't matter whether you're from the Republic or from the Empire. A life is a life, and you did the right thing trying to save his. Wars are no good for anybody.
By the second season, Van is almost a completely different person, being more competent, mature, and now willing to take a life if it means saving the people he cares about. All things that are a far cry from what he was in the beginning of the show. There was a real human element to the show. There was real invisible character development, not just for Van, for just about everybody in the main cast. Irvine was a jackass at the beginning that just wanted to steal Zeke from Van, but slowly became a valuable ally that'll do anything to protect the people he cares about. Fiona became less of a quirky, cute weirdo and became a down-to-earth, competent strategist and a strong-willed person, who still puts salt in her coffee. Zeke decided to stop living a lie and smash down the barrier society had placed on the taboo that is the love between man and robot dinosaur.
Love you!
Oh, come on, Zeke. You're going to
So if I had to give this show a grade based on my own personal opinions, how would I grade it? Probably a B, maybe a B+. might sound kind of surprising considering I was just seeing its praises, and also considering that this was, without a doubt, my favorite show on television when I was 12, but that doesn't mean I think it was perfect, especially on a rewatch. You see, there's something important to remember here. This was an anime for TV that was made and dubbed in the late 90s and early 2000s. I like Zoids a lot, but that doesn't mean the show wasn't without problems, and honestly a lot of the more visible ones are seen throughout the production. Zoids Chaotic Century kind of fell into that weird point in the history of anime dubbing where we were starting to get good quality dubs, but we weren't quite there yet. I'm not a sub versus dub snob. In fact, if I have the option, I'll usually watch a show in English if it's available. And with what I know about how dubbing works, I can't always fault the voice actors themselves. What I mean is that when you dub a foreign production, you're syncing the dubbed words to the characters' moving mouths. That's not the exact science of it, but it's the main gist.
Hold on, give me a sec. But this hurricane, what are we gonna...
Do you know what?
Typically, you record the audio for something before you finish animating it. That way you can adjust the animation to match what the voice actor is saying. But with dubbing, the animation's already done, so you have to be careful to make sure you're not talking when the character's mouth isn't moving and not silent when it is. As a result, there's some points where the dubbing is a little odd.
Corned beef on rye. Go heavy on the mustard. That's strange.
I am a transporter of the wasteland. I'm just making it up as I go along.
But like I said, I'm not going to judge the dub too harshly, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that there's points where it really stood out. All the same, I think the dub was mostly good, and honestly the only reason I can even judge the English dub is because I speak English and know when someone is going to give a good or bad performance. I feel like people often forget that when comparing an English dub to the Japanese one. Also, a weird bit of trivia about this dub, you know how the Y7 rating forbade swearing on children's shows? Well, for some bizarre reason, Chaotic Century actually got away with a few mild swears like hell and damn.
Think I'm going to surrender? I've a better plan. I'm going to take all of you with me to hell!
This was a daytime television show at one point, which meant the target audience were kids, which kind of makes you wonder how this got through. What makes it weirder is that there actually are several scenes cut from the dub that were left in the Japanese version, so why was this dialogue left in? This actually has led to a fan theory about the show. There was an uncut version dubbed, but never shown on television. Something else that kind of held Zoid back sometimes was the animation itself. Zoids operate on two main forms of animation, traditional hand-drawn animation and CGI. Sometimes cartoons that use traditional animation will intercut CGI sequences for things like vehicles and other stuff, and it almost always looks weird and out of place. It catches your eye with how conspicuous it looks and can sometimes be so distracting that it takes away from the scene itself. Zoids surprisingly didn't have much of a problem in that department despite when it was made. The characters and environments were traditionally drawn, animated, while the Zoids themselves were CGI, but with a little bit of cell shading thrown in so they looked a bit more cartoony. They also managed to avoid having the Zoids look too out of place by almost always having them appear in their own scenes together and not in scenes while standing juxtaposed with the other style of animation. Sometimes it would come up, but it was usually incredibly brief, so it wasn't too distracting. In that way, Zoids actually had some pretty decent animation, and there were a lot of cool fight scenes between the Zoids themselves. The problem is that Zoids Chaotic Century shamelessly reuses stock footage again and again and again. It wasn't an uncommon practice at this time for both anime and Western cartoons, but that doesn't make it any less noticeable and feel any less cheap. Every time that Van got into a fight with the Blade Liger, we'd see him do the exact same animation where the blades would come out, the booster would activate, and he'd hop around a bit before cutting through the enemy. Bonus points if he was fighting those Raptorzoids that served as cannon fodder, and we got to see the same animation of them getting destroyed every time. Stock footage is used to fill in time in an episode and stay within your budget. It's just easier and cheaper to reuse the same animations and scenes over and over again, while only changing a few things each time. It's not a sin to keep reusing old footage in certain circumstances, like when you need to keep using an establishing shot for a location or for a transformation sequence, but when you reuse the same action scene over and over again, it really cheapens the impact for your audience. The first time the Blade Liker came on screen and used its swords to cut the bad guys in half, it was really cool and special because we hadn't seen anything like that in the show before. But after the 12th time it happened, it just kind of felt like business as usual. If my reaction to a cool action scene is to start playing Fire Emblem Heroes on my phone while I wait for the next scene to start, I feel like there may have been something done wrong here. Also, what is with these drop rates? Stop giving me the wrong Corrin! Finally, while I did praise the story of Zoids for not going for the black and white morality with the whole evil empire and a heroic republic, the plot still feels kind of aimless at points and can sometimes make you wonder if it's actually going anywhere. Van and Fiona set out so they can uncover Fiona's memories and later start going after Zoid Eve, but that plotline gets dropped and picked up so infrequently that it's really easy to forget about it until someone mentions it again. Despite that the Zoid Eve plotline is the entire driving force between why Van is traveling with Fiona to begin with, they keep getting distracted by other plotlines every 2 episodes. Like when they need to save the Republican capital from getting destroyed by Prozin, or when they need to deliver the Crown Prince to the Empire's capital so he can claim his birthright to rule. It's not that these aren't interesting or exciting plot lines, it's just that the main plot of the Zoid Eve just keeps being an afterthought to the point where it's kind of hard for me to care that much about it when it seems like the characters themselves don't. The good news about all this, though, is that the problems got addressed and fixed from the second season onward. The second season of Chaotic Century takes place a few years after the first, where Van decided to double down on becoming a better Zoid pilot by getting training in the Helix Republic's military, and Fiona gets more serious about finding Zoid Eve. They do eventually end up coming back together, though, and instead end up joining a peacekeeping joint operation between the Republic and the Empire called the Guardian Force, which is also what fans tend to call this season. Guardian Force was more of a military drama story, with Van and the others consistently working with the government now to try and stop terrorist attacks from some evil ginger named Hiltz. Overall, I think it can be agreed that Guardian Force was the best part of Zoid's Chaotic Century. The characters were more mature and had clearly grown as people since we had first seen them. The battle sequences were a lot cooler and used more original animation. There still was stock footage, but wasn't quite as overdone. And finally, the story was a lot more consistent. Aside from a few random filler episodes that didn't pertain to the main plot, like when Moonbay got into a NASCAR Zoid race, there was a consistent threat throughout the series of the bad guy Hiltz and his underling Reese. They did occasionally bring up the subject of Zoid Eve and then once again kind of forget about it completely after, but unlike in the first season, it actually paid off because at the end of the show, we finally find out what the heck Zoid Eve is. Wanna know something funny though? We almost didn't find out, because 4 episodes before the finale, the production of Zoid's Chaotic Century's dub was halted and the show was cancelled. Cartoons getting cancelled could be fairly traumatic for kids back then, not just because the show was suddenly ending with no resolution, because a lot of cartoons that got cancelled were just taken off the air with little to no fanfare. There wasn't a resolution to the plot or a grand finale a lot of the time. Networks would either just remove the show or air reruns while quietly phasing it out. For Chaotic Century, it was the latter. I still remember watching what would have been the final episode where the heroes took on the bad guy and his giant scorpion death machine. It seemed like they finally had him on the ropes and were escaping to safety, only for one of the characters, Thomas, to fall in to be threatened and crushed in a giant gravitational vortex. It makes sense in context. I thought, oh man, this wasn't the final battle after all, despite that being the name of the episode. There's still more! I can't wait to see what happens next! And then I woke up the next morning and saw that the show had just started over from the beginning. And then eventually, it stopped coming on at all. What was a kid to do? I didn't have internet access. I didn't know if the show had been canceled or not. For all I knew, that's just how the show ended. A huge cliffhanger where one of the main characters was gonna die, and we still didn't know what the heck Zoid Eve was. I was pissed! Well, here's the good news. I wasn't the only one. Apparently, fan outcry at this decision to stop the show a mere 4 episodes from the end was so great and outspoken that Cartoon Network decided to go ahead and air the last 4 episodes in a 2-hour marathon on a Saturday.
Sometimes bad things happen to good shows, and you guys pay the price. Now it's time to pay the piper.
And man, this is the kind of decision that made me love Cartoon Network. When people talk about how fond they are of cartoon channels from their childhood, it's for reasons like these. They could have easily had said nothing, aired new shows, and never touched Zoids again, but the fact they actually went ahead and aired the last 4 episodes was pretty damn nifty. I actually remember missing the first 2 episodes of the final 4 at the time because of a soccer game or something stupid, but I did get to see the last 2. I finally got my resolution to the series, so that was enough for me. Zoids may not be the best anime I've ever watched, but there was a time where it was my favorite, and while I'm not entirely sure why that was, I can honestly say that I don't regret waking up all those early mornings to watch this show. The story was good, the characters were fun, the battles were exciting, and the robots were cool. It may have been a show designed to sell toys, but Zoid was still a fun romp despite that. And just one more thing about this show before we go. The music was amazing. For real, the music in this show is still some of my favorites. All of the tracks were really good. Hey, wait a minute, that sounds kind of familiar. Are you serious right now?
Ben, could you please pass me the salt? Thanks a lot.